The concept is simple. It's a tier list with political YouTubers. Now, the criteria of this tier list is that it's not about, how much I agree with these political YouTubers. That would be boring. What it's about is how much we like them. Yes, this is about likability, not about agreeability. And so we have a list of people here, some of whom you may recognize, some of whom you may not, but I'm going to rank them from S tier down to D based on how much I happen to like them. Starting with, Atheism-Is-Unstoppable. Now this guy, the kangaroo, he gives off this kind of schoolyard bully vibe, this kind of I'll insult you so that I don't have to respond to your argument thing. He's got this kind of tough guy persona, like he's always posturing about how much of a masculine dude bro he is. And that makes him very unlikable. But on the other hand, I have heard him in conversation with people before. I think I saw a conversation between him and Sargon of Akkad, and I actually thought he was very interesting. And I actually kind of wanted to interview him one day, and I might do that. But yeah, he doxes people. He's kind of a mean guy from what I've seen. And so I can't put him too high on the list. But he is a centrist liberal, and that does give him a certain kind of originality that I hardly ever see on YouTube. I mean, you see them on TV all the time, but on YouTube, it's not very common to see a centrist liberal who's like super hardcore centrist liberal and will fight people over it. So that's interesting. Like this guy was super hard on the Hillary Clinton stuff in 2016. That was his candidate. I don't think I've seen any YouTuber who loved Hillary Clinton, but apparently he did, or at least he thought that she was the best of all choices. So, what do I do? I'm gonna put him in C. That seems fair. Ben Shapiro. Now, I happen to like Ben Shapiro. I think he has a certain charisma to him. He talks very fast. And the thing that I like about Ben Shapiro is that if you want the basic, standard, neoconservative opinion on any issue, you really can't go wrong with Ben Shapiro. He will pretty much give it to you as you want it, and in the most fast and convenient way possible, eloquently stated. He does tend to make a lot of kind of bad arguments, especially when he's doing stuff like debating religion and stuff, and that kind of shows his very flawed and biased thinking. But overall, I find him quite likable. I think he has this nerdiness that I like. I think Vaush described him as like an 8th grade book report kid. And it is charming. I think he has a lot of intelligence. I think he really is a very intelligent person. And he can use his intelligence in whichever way he wants, but he just happens to use it to be an Orthodox Jewish conservative Zionist. But that's okay. That's his prerogative. I'll give him. I'm not comfortable going A, but I'll put him in B tier. Next, we have Blaire White. Blaire White fills a niche that quite a lot of people are filling now. The edgy trans person niche, like the trans person who is against other trans people. I kind of have a soft spot for these sorts of people. I know they're detested on the left. They're called like pick-me's or something, whatever that means. But Blaire White is pretty much the original edgy, politically incorrect trans person. And for that, she gets some credit. I think she's generally reasonable, although she does tend to get kind of catty. Like she tends to get overly involved in kind of petty politics and petty drama. Not in a super personal way, but just in a super catty way. Like, she will kind of insult people, I think, a little bit too much. But I like that she's out there as a trans person injecting a little bit of honesty into the trans conversation. I mean, say what you want. You can disagree with her opinions, but I like the fact that she's honest about her identity. She says, I don't think of myself as a woman. I don't claim to be as a woman. To be a woman. I am a trans woman, and that's a different thing. which I see that as very honest. That's, not making any claim to be anything other than what you are. And for that, I have respect for her. She's not trying to change society's perception of gender. She's just trying to be accepted with the lifestyle that she lives. It makes me wonder if in a different life, if she had been conservative from the beginning instead of being like a left-wing person who became a conservative later on, it makes me wonder if she would have transitioned at all, because a lot of her rhetoric seems pretty anti-transgender. And there's, as much as I'll praise her honesty in certain respects, I have noticed that there seems to be a bit of dishonesty about her too, like how she lied about her political compass results, and that was pretty embarrassing. And there are other things where people have accused her of lying that seem to have pretty good evidence. So I don't know if I really like her that much. I'll put her on C tier. Next we have Dave Rubin. He's a D tier. He sucks. He's a total airhead. He has got nothing going on between the ears. He's got no actual perspective. He's a pure grifter, plain and simple, with nothing to offer. Even Joe Rogan understands that. As mild-mannered and friendly as he is, you would think he would have a certain amount of likability, but just the plain, lack of any kind of dignity in the intellectual space kind of ruins all of that for me. So I can't give him anything higher than a D. Dennis Prager, I mean, can you get more Republican than Dennis Prager? This man is the model of what a Republican is. And for that, he gets a D. Kraut and Tea. He has since rebranded as Kraut. I didn't really watch him when he was Kraut and Tea, so my perception of him has more to do with his Kraut phase, and as the bird character, the whatever kind of bird that is, I actually quite like him. I like his country ball history videos. I think they're very interesting. He's a liberal, just kind of your basic European liberal. But one thing I really like about him is his voice. He has this lovely, absolutely lovely German accent that I just love hearing. I never get tired of hearing it. It makes him sound very intelligent, and he is quite intelligent. I am going to put him on A tier. In fact, just for his voice, I'm going to put him up to S. Next we have Gavin McInnes. Gavin McInnes, not McGinnis. This guy's a little bit of a weirdo. He has this thing where you can't really tell if he's trolling when he talks, because he says things that he honestly, he gives me Colbert Report vibes. Like he feels like a parody of a conservative pundit. And I mean that like down to the various artifacts of his being. Like he wears those suspenders and carries around a briefcase, and he kind of lives this sort of stereotype of the conservative who just doesn't care, like he doesn't have respect for art. He only cares about money and business. And I feel like he plays this up as kind of a character. Like I don't think that this is really him. I think that Gavin McInnes at his heart is just an edgelord. And back in the 80s, that manifested for him as punk rock. He was a punk rocker. And he had a bunch of tattoos about like anarchism and feminism and stuff. And then he kind of transitioned into this sort of Vice hipster sort of thing in the 2000s before finally just embracing his transition into just being a hardcore conservative. But he was always chasing what's going to be edgy, what's going to make me hated. And by, the law of inverse, liked by a lot of people. And so I wonder how much of his turn to conservatism was motivated out of a genuine interest in politics, and how much of it was motivated just by him trying to be the edgiest thing that he can be in the moment. Because a lot of what he does and says feels disingenuous, and disingenuous for the purposes of comedy, which is interesting. It really is like he's playing a character. And he's someone who plays characters all the time. Like he plays this Scottish parody of his father, and he plays this, parody of liberals. He does a lot of these little characters. And so his regular Gavin McInnes persona really just does feel like a character. Also, he's he's bisexual, even... all right, this might be a little bit of a stretch, but, like, he's done and said so many things that indicate that he's attracted to men over the years. He's even put a dildo up his ass. Either that or a butt plug. It was one of those. And he talked about how, like, oh, bisexuals, they're not really bi, they're just horny. I mean, if I were that young and horny, I would be bi too. I don't know, there's just a recurring pattern of this stuff, and I can't ignore it. But that being said, all that said, I find his comedy actually very funny. Like, I actually do find his conservative man persona a very funny character. And I think he's a decent comedian, so I can't give him super low marks. He has outrageous opinions, but those opinions often feel manufactured to be outrageous, so how mad can I really get at him? I don't know. I think I'll put him in C tier. Next, there's Hunter Avallone, who used to be a really annoying conservative boy on YouTube, and then switched sides very quickly after he talked to Vaush. I think Vaush broke his brain, and then he became a liberal. Even though he was like, don't worry guys, I'm not becoming a liberal. I still believe in free speech, which is funny because it just shows how the propaganda around conservatives being all about free speech really took hold of people, even though it's just totally not true. I haven't seen any evidence that conservatives are more likely to favor free speech than liberals. It just seems that they're more likely to favor conservative speech. But Hunter Avallone, I mean, he started out, his videos were absolutely terrible, and he was like the Shane Dawson of conservatism. And now his videos are marginally better. I mean, he's a little bit smarter than he used to be. He's no longer a conservative. But he's not really very good at what he does. I don't know, he's trying to get into discourse and debating, and he's a little bit rough at it. He's a little bit clumsy at it. Doesn't really have the best research skills, I think. There's just not really a lot going for him. I don't dislike him, but I don't really like him enough to give him anything other than C. Next we have Jimmy Dore, who's basically the Alex Jones of the left. He's a very kind of populist conspiracy theory kind of guy. It's funny because he actually spat on Alex Jones at the RNC, and then later on he became friends with Alex Jones. Interesting how that happens. He's one of these people who's trying to create like a left-right populist unity, and I'm not really a big fan of that idea, because what he really seems to be doing is just validating all the opinions of the right-wing lunatics and agreeing with a lot of them. And then he will, implicitly have a left-wing populist message thrown in, but it's becoming increasingly hard to find any, actual left-wing politics in the Jimmy Dore show. It seems like he just has this vague sort of populism that he's about, but the specific socialist vision that he used to have on his show seems to have kind of fallen by the wayside, and I wonder how much of that is because he's kind of just trying to attract this audience of right-wingers to his show. It's very confusing. I think the first time I noticed there was something really weird going on with Jimmy Dore was when he interviewed Caleb Cain. And there was this big right-wing conspiracy theory at the time that Caleb Cain was a PSYOP plant. And that's totally ridiculous. There's no reason to believe that. But a lot of people just want to believe that nobody genuinely just comes out of nowhere and attacks the alt-right. So it has to be some sort of a psyop. I mean, it can't just be that New York Times and all these other outlets latched onto this kid because they thought he was interesting. No, it has to be a big conspiracy. But the weird thing was, when he interviewed Caleb Cain, he went on a rant, a populist kind of anti-democrat rant, as he does all the time on his show, which is, whatever. But he did that at the end of the video, and then everyone in the comments, for some reason, were so stupid that they thought that he was ranting against Caleb Cain. They thought that his rant was directed against... They were like, he destroyed Caleb Cain. No, what? He didn't say anything against him. He was he wasn't even agreeing with him. He was just going off on his own personal tangent. It had nothing to do with Caleb. But that's when I first realized Jimmy Dore's audience is super right-wing, and I didn't know that before, because Jimmy Dore himself is super left-wing, and I think he still is. But because his rhetoric is so anti-Democratic Party, he hates the Democrats pretty much as any Republican does. He attracts a weird breed of people. He fills a very unique space in this kind of YouTube punditry world. But as a person, I find him quite likable. I mean, I like a lot of his fiery populist rhetoric. I like his real brashness. But I can't say I love him. I mean, I didn't like the fact that he spat on Alex Jones, and I think the fact that he did that was kind of says a lot about what kind of a person he is. So I'll put him at B tier. That seems fair. Next, we have J.J. McCullough. Now, J.J. McCullough doesn't really make a lot of overtly political news-based videos. He's not much of a pundit on YouTube, but he is a pundit outside of YouTube. He had a whole career as a Canadian political pundit doing reports on Canadian news stories. And generally, he markets himself as kind of the representative of Canada on YouTube, an ambassador for Canada on YouTube. But it's interesting because he's a conservative and he's very much a fan of the United States. And that kind of puts him at odds with a lot of Canadian nationalists who have this sort of liberal, left-wing, anti-American nationalism where they're trying to differentiate themselves from America because they realize how similar the two countries are. And because the two countries are similar, they can't acknowledge that fact, or they'll just be kind of culturally absorbed into America. Like, they want Canada to be known for something, and so they try to differentiate Canada. And so then they hearken back to, well, you know, we have a parliamentary system, and a lot of our culture actually is more rooted in the old world, in the United Kingdom. And, oh, look, we have French people here. We're a land of two languages. And JJ is very unpopular with the Quebecois. He's very unpopular with the French. And that's because he's very skeptical of the French kind of hold on the Canadian government. He's very skeptical of the way that French is an official language, and that kind of bars people from entry into politics unless they can speak French, and also civil service. Like, a lot of opportunities are closed off to people who can't speak French, which creates this kind of bilingual sort of cartel in charge of the country. And that upsets a lot of French people because they're like super butthurt about the fact that they live in an English-speaking country and my culture. Meanwhile, JJ's just like, you know, guys, I kind of like America. America seems like a pretty good country. Why don't we just, you know, accept the fact that we're America's little brother? And I can kind of respect that. I respect him just being like, whatever. I don't have some fucking complex about this shit like you guys do. I'm just living my life. But at the same time, there's a bunch of weird stuff about JJ. Like, he sits on an exercise ball instead of a chair. And so he's always bouncing around in his videos. And his accent is fake. Or at least a lot of Canadians believe it's fake. I've never seen a Canadian who could corroborate that they've heard an accent like JJ's. Pretty much every Canadian I've ever seen talk about JJ says that his accent is fake, and that's because he says a boot, whereas most Canadians say about or a boat. But JJ very clearly says a boot every time, and it irritates a lot of Canadians because they're like, who does that? Especially because JJ lives in Vancouver, and I don't know if he was raised somewhere outside of Vancouver. I seem to recall him saying that he was raised in British Columbia, so maybe I'm wrong about that. You can let me know if I'm wrong about that. But people in British Columbia tend to not have that kind of accent anyway. I think so, at least. And generally, British Columbia is known to be kind of the most American province in Canada, which is another reason why a lot of people don't like him, because they're like, yeah, this guy lives in the most American part of Canada, and he thinks that Canada is basically America too. What a shock. But I think that JJ has a lot of extensive knowledge about Canadian culture outside of British Columbia. I mean, he is basically an ambassador of Canada to the United States, so an unofficial ambassador. So I mean, I don't know if you could really level that criticism against him. So he's a complicated guy with a complicated kind of reputation. I would like to make a video about him someday, but I will put him in B tier. I generally like him. Next we have John Doyle, who goes in D tier. He's a far-right commentator, and he is not really all that intelligent. He has a lot of bad arguments, and it's like he's trying to have the worst takes on every issue ever. Like, John Doyle unironically thinks that Gaston is the hero of Beauty and the Beast, and he wants to be like Gaston, a guy who's totally anti-intellectual and doesn't read books that don't have pictures in them. Yeah, that's the guy who John Doyle looks up to. Fucking moron. Next we have Kyle Kulinski, who I like. I'm gonna put Kyle in A tier. He's probably my favorite of these, standard news-based pundits on YouTube. Kyle has this thing where he's so stuck in the 90s. And it's kind of charming in a very quaint way. Like, everything that he thinks is cool is what was cool back in the 90s. And so he has this very kind of tacky fashion sense, this kind of tacky sense of what's cool. But he has a very likable and charming personality to go with it. So it becomes very endearing. And another thing about Kyle is that he basically, the only thing he knows about is politics. Anything else, he's like a total ignoramus, which makes it hilarious watching his podcast that he does with his friend Corin, because it's these two guys like trying to stumble their way through explaining things in the world that aren't political, and just hearing them talk just reveals so much about how little they really know about the world. And I find it very amusing. But I think both of them are very likable people and intelligent people in their own way. It's just the lack of broad knowledge about different subjects, the very kind of the focused nature of Kyle's interest. Like, I'm interested in politics, I know about politics, and like nothing else. Next we have Sargon of Akkad. Now, I like Sargon of Akkad. I was a fan of his videos back in 2015 or so. Looking back, I think a lot of them don't hold up very well, but I think his personality shines through anyway. What Sargon really had back in those days was an everyman appeal. He was a guy, he just felt like a normal guy. Just a normal guy who was looking at the world and saying, this doesn't make sense, this is stupid, I'm going to point this out. And he did it in a very relatable way, in a very charming way. And he had a certain humility about him, and a certain earnestness, and a certain eagerness to learn about things like history and philosophy. As someone who's also interested in history, his kind of history fascination with the whole Mesopotamian gimmick, it really appealed to me. It really inspired me. I really enjoyed his stuff. And, he was a bit nerdy. Like, he was into gaming. He was a gamer. And so, he could relate to people on that level. But I feel like in the last several years, like in the last 5 or 6 years, Sargon has become he's increasingly felt like he's kind of put himself on a pedestal and sort of exited the world of the everyman appeal. And he's also drifted a lot farther right. Like, he wasn't really right-wing at the beginning. He was, very critical of feminism, obviously, but he wasn't a right-winger. He seemed like a pretty average kind of social liberal guy. Like, I think I remember him making a video in the 2015 election about how, like, the Conservative Party is not your friend, don't vote Conservative. And I definitely remember him making a video defending the minimum wage or raising the minimum wage, and he went through, like, all of these statistics about, like, this is what an average person living in the UK needs to live on every month. Why can't we give this to people? And when Kevin Logan used to call him conservative back in the day, he laughed at it. He thought it was laughably ridiculous. And it kind of was back then, because he really didn't seem like a conservative. He really just seemed like a moderate. But he's ceased being a moderate lately, and he seems to have gone full right-wing. And in this very, like, Rule Britannia sort of right-wing, which it's so odd. Like, he's now, like, all about the British Empire was awesome, and God Save the King. It's this, Robin Hood and Aristotle. And he's talking about, society needs rules. We need rules in society so that we can know what to do. And England is a Christian country, even though he's an atheist. He's gone very far right, very into the whole culture war thing. But like I said, I don't think his videos were ever really that good from the beginning. I think looking back, there's a lot of logical errors in his analysis. He didn't give people the benefit of the doubt. He kind of made a lot of bad assumptions about what people were talking about. And he just made a lot of assumptions in general that weren't very true. H-Bomber guy criticized him, and he was pretty correct in doing so. Sargon is someone who was once a moderate everyman and is now something that doesn't even really resemble what he used to be. But at the same time, when I see him engaging in conversations with people, I still do find him very likable. There's just something, I have a real soft spot for him. There is just something I really like about his personality. He has this gentle warmth to him and a very lovely voice. So I am going to put him in B tier. I like him. Maybe not as much as I used to, but I like him. Steven Crowder. And I think we're going to need another tier. Let's see. Add a row below. We'll make it green. And we'll call it F. That is where we'll put Steven Crowder. Next, we have Stefan Molyneux. Stefan Molyneux. Total fucking psycho. I'm putting him in D tier. Total fucking psycho, Stefan Molyneux. I cannot believe anybody likes this guy. Vaush. I'm putting him in A tier. Because I do like his videos. I do find him entertaining. I do generally like him, but God, is he a pompous dick. I mean, he challenges you not to like him. I mean, he really, dares you not to like him. This guy does not want to be liked. But because I have a soft spot for people like that, I don't know. I generally think I agree with his politics, but there is also a lot of stuff I don't agree with him on. I'm not an anarchist, for one. But he was a very influential person on me. He was one of the people who was most effective at making me interested in socialism. But yeah, man, he is such a debate bro. He has ultimate debate bro energy, and it's kind of cringe. But at the same time, he's pretty good at it, and he makes a lot of sense. Based on the things that I've said, it's kind of weird that I'm putting him in A tier, but that's honestly where I would put him. I do think that he's I like him more than any of these guys in B tier. I like him about as much as I like Kyle Kulinski. Next, we have Shoe on Head. Now, the question with Shoe on Head that's on everyone's mind is, do I simp for Shoe on Head? And the answer is yes, 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 1,000 times yes. I simp for Shoe on Head. I am an unashamed simp for this woman. She's beautiful, but more than that, she's hilarious. She's a great comedian. Her writing is so fucking good lately. And it was always pretty good. I mean, she was always really funny. But man, lately she's getting so good. She's kind of like the shy wallflower type. She's not super outgoing, although she's been getting better at it in recent years. She's also super kinky and submissive, so that's interesting. And she's married to a super far right. She's married to a super far right Christian Catholic integralist monarchist kind of guy. But she herself is a social democrat, which is interesting that she's able to, that these people with very different politics are able to still like each other, and not just like each other, but be married to each other. But she has, because of her kind of submissive energy, she does enjoy a bit of that traditional trad wife lifestyle. So I can see why she would get along with somebody who's more of a conservative. But he's a real hardcore paleo conservative from what I've heard. But he must still be likable. He must still be a cool guy if she's able to be married to him. He's not John Doyle, I can tell you that. She ain't marrying no John Doyle down here. Next, we have the Amazing Atheist. He goes in S tier. Obviously, if you know anything about me, the Amazing Atheist is one of the most influential people on me. And, definitely my favorite YouTuber. His videos are nowhere near as good as they used to be, but I will always have a soft spot for him. He will always be important to me. S tier, by far. I mean, one of the best. He has one of the best libraries of content out there. Next, we have No Fuckers. He's more of like, he was in the commentary community around 2016. He was with people like Pyrocynical. He was in that crowd, but then he slowly kind of become more political, and really it's just because Russia has gotten more political. It's gotten a lot less liberal over the years, even though it was never really all that liberal to begin with. And because of that, it's kind of motivated him to talk more about Russian politics, talk more about former Soviet Union politics. And he does a really great job at it. And he's, one of the most accessible voices for that kind of thing that you don't really see a whole lot of in our culture. And so I think people really value and appreciate his liberal Russian perspective on politics. And for that, I'll put him in A tier. Next, we have Michael Knowles, who, I'm just going to bring up the elephant in the room. He sets off my gaydar. He has this closet gay man thing about him. He gives those vibes. And he also, he was in student films in college where he played gay characters. More than one, I think. So it seems like there's something going on with him. But, he's a Daily Wire guy. He works for Ben Shapiro. When I first saw him, I remember thinking, wow, this guy is really dumb. And I didn't mean it like, I disagree with him, so I'm calling him dumb. It's just, no, he really just struck me as like, this guy's working for the Daily Wire? Really? Like, he just seemed too dumb to be doing the job he was doing. He just didn't seem like he had the intellect there. But I guess that's what Republicans like. I gotta say, I don't really like Michael Knowles all that much, but I do like his editor. He has really funny editors. Some of the videos he makes, like the more lighthearted ones, will be just filled with a bunch of memes and gags. Matt Walsh has the same editor, I think, because you see the same thing in some of Matt Walsh's videos. But I mean, Michael, he's so bland and inoffensive that, can you really get mad at him? I'm going to put him in C tier because I definitely, he's not as bad as these assholes down here, but he's just kind of, really tepid. And speaking of Matt Walsh, he's next. I kind of feel the same way about him. He does strike me as a little bit more intelligent than Michael Knowles. He also strikes me as a heterosexual. But he does kind of the same thing as Michael Knowles, just maybe in a slightly more refined way. He does tend to make a lot of bad, fallacious arguments, kind of like Ben does. But he doesn't really focus on anything other than social issues. And he does it from a very kind of Christian perspective. But he's just not all that interesting when you get down to it. Next, we have Alex Jones. I don't know if I like Alex Jones. It's complicated. Because, people like him because he's insane. People like watching, they're turning, I'm tired of them putting chemical in the water that turned the freaking frogs gates, that kind of thing. But it's like, that's fun for a little remix or a 3-minute clip. That's fun for a short amount of time. But, God, have you ever tried to listen to his actual show? It's unlistenable. It's unwatchable. It's so boring. And he'll just ramble about these things that I've never heard of. These obscure conspiracy theories that obviously people in his audience know what he's talking about, but I haven't the slightest clue. And he has this way of just, when he talks so fast and so with very little in him that really feels human. And he just rambles and mutters about bullshit that I don't even know what he's saying. And what's frustrating is, with no context really for what he's talking about, it's hard to even say that I disagree with him, because that wouldn't even be honest, because I have no clue what he's saying. He's just like, the Bilderbergs and George Soros and the Illuminati. It's that kind of thing. And then he brings people on his show who say Obama is a demon because a fly landed on him one time, and he's like, yeah, that sounds right. Queen Elizabeth is a vampire. But, like, unless you know, like, what he's talking about, like, where did he get this idea that Queen Elizabeth was a vampire? And, like, how serious is he about that? With no reference for these crazy ideas, it's just like, what do I even do with this information? You know, at some level, somewhere deep down, there's an affable kind of center to this guy. And there's a reason why a lot of people like him. But I don't know, it's just, he's so inaccessible to me. I just can't get into him. I'm putting him on... he's not as bad as these guys. I'm putting him in C tier. Next we have Tim Pool, also known as Dim Tool or Dim Fool. He goes in D tier. He sucks. He's kind of like a way smarter version of Dave Rubin. Just an obvious grifter, like, I'm a moderate liberal. Even though he says nothing liberal ever. Or if he is calling himself a liberal, it's like a clear deception because he's like calling himself an old school 19th century liberal or some shit. Which is not what people mean in America when they call themselves liberal. Basically, he's a conservative who just for some reason is allergic to that word. And I say for some reason, but I know the reason. It's because he's playing the grift because he knows that conservatives love when someone outside of their designated group validates their opinions. So they love it when a liberal validates their opinions. They love it when a gay person validates their opinions. They love it when a woman does, or they love these token people who they can, you know, the black people, the black conservative. They love these tokens who are like, see, I'm not a straight white cis male, so, and I agree with conservatism, so, you know, it's reasonable. And so I think he recognized that, and he was just like, yeah, I'm gonna exploit this. But his analysis is just garbage. He's always wrong about everything. And he's so insecure about going bald. Like, he wears this beanie all the time. And then one time, this alt-right guy took off his beanie and he got super mad at him. And he was like, do you know why I wear the beanie? He was posturing like crazy. He was like, do you know why I wear the beanie? It's because when I go out, then people won't recognize me. Which is obviously not true, because that would imply that there's ever a moment when Tim Pool is not wearing his beanie, which, I mean, he's taken a couple of pictures without his beanie just to show, like, hey, see, I'm not insecure, but come on, no one's buying it. He looks like he's dying on the inside. His own brother hates him. His own dad thinks he's a total fool and makes videos making fun of him. Yeah, I'm serious about that. Look it up. He just has no dignity. Like, he's just embarrassed himself for his whole career ever since he started becoming a pundit instead of just a journalist. Speaking of fake journalists, we have the Young Turks. Now, I've always had a soft spot for the Young Turks. And I'm specifically talking about the two guys in the picture, Cenk and Anna here. The Turk and the Armenian who somehow became friends. An unlikely friendship, a Turk and an Armenian. What's next? But no, I like Cenk and I like Anna. I like both of them. I've never got into the whole hype train, the hate against the Young Turks. I get it. They say dumb things sometimes. They're disagreeable sometimes. They're sometimes rude. They're sometimes, you know, not very civil people. I like them. I still like them. I like their sense of humor, especially Cenk's sense of humor. I think he's a very charismatic, likable guy. He's kind of just this Joe. He's like, his name should be Joe. If he had an English name, it would be Joe. Cenk is kind of like the Turkish version of Joe, I guess. And that's kind of what he is. He's just like, you know, as much as he's a Turk, he really is just an American at heart. He's like more American than native-born Americans. And Anna is a cool, kind of hip, liberal lady, pretty good looking too. So I don't know, I like these guys. I'm gonna put them in B tier. That might be controversial. Some of you are like, no, I hate the Young Turks. I don't hate them. All right, next we have Destiny. Now I'm gonna put Destiny in A tier, even though this is about who's most likable, and Destiny does not have the riz. He does not have charisma. He's like this kind of hunched over, hunchback kind of like recluse who doesn't shave and is like really bitter. But man, is he intelligent. His intelligence is so high. His IQ is so big-brained that I can't help but like him. He just debates better than anyone else I've seen. It's gotta be A tier for Destiny. Next we have Jean-Francois Gariepy. I think that's how you pronounce his name. JF, we can call him JF. That's what he goes by. This is yet another French-Canadian. And I have a kind of a unique relationship with him because I was a Drunken Peasants fan. And Drunken Peasants fans will know what I'm talking about because he made his start on that podcast back in 2015. And back then, nobody knew that he was an alt-right white nationalist ethno-stater. He just seemed like a normal guy. And he's pretty cool. He was pretty cool back then. I mean, he did a rap battle against the resident lolcow of Drunken Peasants, G-Man, which is really fun. You can watch it on YouTube right now, JF versus G-Man rap battle. It was entertaining. He really got into the spirit of the show. He really vibed with those guys well, and the rest of us, the fans, vibed with him pretty well. He was a bit eccentric. Like, he always had some pretty unique opinions. Like, he believed that there's no reason to think that carbon-based life is the most likely to be found outside of our solar system, that we should be looking for other ways that life can form other than just like basic, carbon and water and, oxygen environments, which to me seemed kind of ridiculous. Like, I never really bought into that idea. Like, it seems like if this is the only form of life that we know about, we should expect that it might just be the only form of life that can exist. But he was pretty certain, like, no, there's no reason to assume that. And it's like, but like, can we kind of assume it just for the sake of, not just searching everywhere and anywhere for any signs of life that we have no even theory for how they could possibly exist. If there's no hypothesis for how this form of life can exist, then why would we expect it to exist at all? And so that kind of told me a little bit about the way he thinks. He's a slightly oblique thinker, but he also is very intelligent. Don't underestimate the intelligence of JF. He's a scientist and he has a lot of education, and he's a free thinker. But at the same time, he is a white nationalist. He is a very far-right man, kind of like a libertarian, sort of minarchist, but also like very nationalistic and racist. It's an interesting combination, but it's a combination that's actually not all that uncommon. A lot of people really hate this guy. Kraut really hated this guy. Destiny really hates this guy. I don't hate him. He has been accused of murdering his wife, which, knowing JF, he might be guilty of that. That does kind of seem like something that JF might do. I don't know for sure, obviously. But yeah, I don't dislike him. There's enough to like about him and his charm and intelligence that I'm going to put him in B tier. I like him more than Alex Jones. He's a good conversationalist too. I think he has good skills with just being able to relate to people in a conversation. Next we have Nick Fuentes, who, okay, I'm just going to get it out of the way. A tier. A tier for Nick Fuentes. I know that some of you might think that's absurd that I like Nick Fuentes enough to put him in A tier next to all of these other yahoos. He's a super far right kind of, I mean, he's kind of everything that JF is, except he's not a libertarian. He's an authoritarian. He believes in like monarchy, and he's basically a fascist. But man, if he isn't likable. He has this just awkward charisma about him. Like, his laugh. He has a great sense of humor. He is always laughing at things. He always seems to kind of be enjoying life. And he's also pretty intelligent and good at debating. Like, he holds his own against Destiny. In fact, Destiny and Nick have this sort of thing together. It's a chemistry. They have great chemistry with each other, and I just love seeing them talk to each other. Because something tells me that they're kind of similar, even though their politics are on opposite sides of the spectrum. But Nick Fuentes, as radical as he is, he might be my favorite right-wing pundit. Because he just doesn't care what people think. He's willing to get banned from every bank in America and have to use cryptocurrency. He's willing to be on the no-fly list. And obviously these things have, been difficult for him. But he's willing to just stand by his opinion. And also, he's like a few months older than me. He's my age. And it's just so weird to see someone my age become such an important figure. Like, he's almost like, is there anyone in the far right in America who's more important than Nick Fuentes at this point? I don't know if there is, other than Donald Trump, obviously. He's the daddy. But is there anyone who's explicitly like a super far right pundit and personality who has more pull on that segment of the population than Nick? I'm not sure that there is. So just the amount of influence that he's managed to acquire in his time doing this, in his career, and the fact that he's been able to make a career out of this, even though the whole world is against him, is kind of admirable. But I really would not want to live in a world run by Nick Fuentes. Next, we have Sam Seder. I'm going to put Sam Seder in A also. I don't know, he's kind of an unlikely favorite for me, because at first glance, it seems like he doesn't really have a whole lot going on, but I like the fact that he dunks on other YouTubers. I like the fact that he dunks on Dave Rubin and Tim Pool all the time. I enjoy that kind of content. And he also is very willing to engage in debates, and even though I don't really agree or like the debate format, I do like that about him, that he's very confident. But I guess another thing that really drew me to him is the fact that every conservative seems to be so afraid of him. Like, Steven Crowder was petrified by Sam Seder. He really did not want to debate Sam Seder, and he bailed on a debate when he was ambushed by Sam Seder, which was really weird. And the same thing with Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager didn't want to debate him. It's like, what is it about Sam Seder that makes people so afraid? It seems like they're just like, I don't know, because he's not like super rude. It's not like he's some like total jackass who has no respect for civility or the process. He's not like Cenk Uygur. Like, I would understand if they didn't want to debate Cenk, because Cenk is like yelling at people all the time. He's like, how dare you not support Palestine? How dare you? Sam Seder doesn't really do that. He seems like just kind of this nerdy Jewish man, like, but really, if you look at it, it's not really the way you're describing. That's kind of Sam Seder. Like, why is this guy the person everyone's afraid of? And that kind of made him an unlikely favorite for me. It's kind of like, I like this guy's arc that he's on. I'm interested in seeing where it goes. Next, we have Contrapoints. Never really got into her videos. Never really jived with the whole bread tube style, the whole sort of like passive, aloof, kind of like the vestigial remnants of the rant genre getting watered down and turned into some like pseudo-academic bullshit. I don't know. And like very overproduced with a lot of fluff. Like a lot of style over substance. There's a lot of things I don't really dig about this kind of genre video. But I do think that Contrapoints pulls it off pretty well. I'm going to put her in B tier. I do think her videos are pretty entertaining for this genre, and she kind of has like a YMS, Adam from YMS energy to her. I don't know if anyone else notices this, but that's kind of who she reminds me of, and I really like him. Next, we have Jesse Lee Peterson. Enough said.
That is amazing.
Paul Joseph Watson, never liked him. I'm putting him in D tier. Could soy food consumption be turning men into pussies? I kind of like his ridiculous northern accent, but I don't know, man. He's just something about him. He just seems like a prick. Joe Rogan, the ultimate centrist, will agree with whatever the person next to him says. But at the same time, he does seem to have a genuineness to him. He does so out of genuine skepticism of his own, certainty, rather than out of just out of the Dave Rubin thing where he has nothing going on in his head. He does think about stuff, and he does challenge his guests when they say something absolutely stupid. Like, for instance, when Dave Rubin was on his show and he tried to argue that we don't need building codes, and Joe was just like, no, we need building codes. We need some things like building codes. No. So I like Joe Rogan generally. He's not really all that interesting to me, but he does bring on interesting guests sometimes, and he has interesting interviews quite often. So I'll put him in C tier. Kind of a meathead, kind of a bro, kind of not really my vibe, but generally pretty decent fellow. You could definitely do a lot worse for the number one podcaster in America. All right, we have two more. David Pakman, Deepak Chopra. Actually, I think that David Pakman is a big critic of Deepak Chopra, if I'm correct. I know he's a big critic of, you know who I'm thinking of? It might not be Deepak Chopra. It might be, what the fuck is his name? The Muslim guy, the guy who converted to Islam. Reza Aslan. He's made a lot of videos against Reza Aslan, and those are some of the first David Pakman videos that I really enjoyed. When he goes after someone, he does a pretty good job at systematically laying out his reasons for not liking them. And he's pretty systematic in his approach in general. He's a pretty fine-tuned commentator. He doesn't really go into the theatrics as much as some other people. He keeps it very steady. If there's anything I don't really dig about him, it's maybe his foreign policy. Not too big on that. It seems kind of normie, neoliberal foreign policy for the most part. But generally, I think his heart is in the right place. I like him. I'll put him in B tier. And then finally, we have Hasan Piker. I'll put him in D tier. He's the only lefty who I'm putting in D tier, and that's because he is the absolute worst of the left. I mean, he represents everything wrong with the left, just total lack of critical thinking, blind support of whatever bullshit left-wing position, blind support of the CCP, blind support of Palestine and Hamas for some reason, even though they're like a far-right extremist party. Just total garbage. And he has this thing, I think Vaush has a little bit of it, but he has a lot of it, where I feel like he started out doing this kind of lazy, like, I don't care energy as like kind of a gag. Like, look at me, I don't give a shit. I'm eating on camera. I'm leaving the room while the video's playing. But it slowly just became who he is. And I don't know if that theory is true. It might have just been who he was from the beginning, but it seems like how can you bring yourself to put so little effort into your content, to be so boring, to just have nothing worthwhile? And I guess for that, he's a good match with Ethan Klein, because Ethan Klein also kind of fell into that trap. Because if you look at Ethan's early H3 podcasts, he did put effort into them. He was present. He was at the table. He was sitting up straight. He was talking. But then slowly he started to slouch more and more into his chair and became, I don't know, he just lost his spark. And it seems like at first he did that as a gag, like, oh, look at me, how much I don't care. But then it just became his habit. But yeah, I mean, Hasan, and he's just a dick too. Like, Hasan is just so mean to people. Like, I've never seen someone this mean. Just character assassination, just doesn't care about good discourse, doesn't care about like having an actual argument, is just all about beating other people down, shouting other people down. He's just a bad dude. But yeah, that's my tier list. It follows a predictable bell curve, which I like. A lot of tier lists that I've made do kind of fall into this bell curve shape. What do you think? Comment below. Let me know where you would put these people. I love you. Have a good day.